This isn't just a story of heartbreak, it's a game of power. While her husband believed he had the upper hand, Eleanor was sitting on a hidden empire that could destroy him overnight. Timing, silence, and precision become her greatest weapons. When the truth explodes, it's not revenge, it's domination. The lesson? Never underestimate someone who has nothing left to lose. Like and share to help us bring more powerful stories. Thanks for watching.
Caroline did not even hear the crystal flute as it smashed on the marble floor. Her entire world was focused on her husband's hand, which was resting on another woman's stomach. He gently traced slow circles with his thumb, the same way he used to touch her. There she stood, 8 months pregnant with their child, in a ballroom filled with 500 guests. She watched her billionaire husband whisper something to his mistress. Then, a horrible realization hit her like a physical blow. Vivian was not just his secret love, she was also pregnant with his child. What unfolded next would tear down a billion-dollar empire. But Preston Ashworth was completely ignorant of one very important detail. For the last 3 months, his wife had not been crying in despair. She had been methodically building a case against him. She gathered proof, recorded their private talks, and made a note of every single lie he told. The very woman he brushed off as emotional and unstable was about to cause his complete ruin. She walked out of the party without making a sound. There was no yelling, no arguing, and no sign of what was to come. By the next morning, Preston Ashworth would learn that he had lost it all. He lost his company, his family's wealth, his public image, and his freedom. This is the story of how one woman's silence turned into the most powerful weapon imaginable. This story teaches a deep and meaningful lesson. It shows that being quiet is not the same as being weak. Sometimes, the quietest people are getting ready for the greatest comeback. Your own value is not decided by how another person treats you. Your value is shown by how you react when they completely underestimate you. This story has an even more powerful message. Every woman who has ever felt like a ghost in her own marriage will recognize herself in Caroline. Every person who has been lied to and made to feel crazy for listening to their own instincts will feel that their feelings are valid. This story is evidence that you are never so broken that you cannot heal. You are never so lost that you cannot find your way home. And in the end, your voice is never so quiet that it cannot change things. A true win is not about getting even. It is about taking back your own life. The champagne glass dropped from Caroline's hand the instant she saw her husband's hand on Vivian Marlowe's pregnant stomach. The crystal broke into pieces on the polished marble. The sound sliced through the string music, as sharp and shocking as a scream. 500 sets of eyes immediately turned toward the noise, but Caroline paid no attention to the stares. Her whole universe had shrunk down to the far side of the room at the Ashworth Foundation's annual charity party. Her focus was completely on Preston, on his hand, and on the other woman's body. The Metropolitan Ballroom was a display of immense wealth, with chandeliers worth $10 million lighting up the room from above. Women in dresses that cost a fortune moved like they were floating between tables covered in white silk. Waiters moved silently with silver trays holding food that cost more than most people's rent for a month. It was the single most important social gathering of the year, and Caroline's husband was lovingly touching another woman who was also pregnant. In her mind, she counted 1, 2, 3 seconds that he touched her. His thumb made a slow, soft circle. Vivian gave a small laugh at something he whispered to her. Caroline knew that laugh well. It was the one Preston used when he was trying to be charming, when he was being his true self. He had not laughed that way with her in a very long time. A waiter was suddenly at her feet. He cleaned up the broken glass with a quick and skillful motion. He did not look at her. Nobody did. The guests had already turned back to their conversations. They were in their own worlds again, having already forgotten about the pregnant wife who had dropped a glass. Caroline's expensive silk dress felt uncomfortably tight around her pregnant belly. She was 8 months into her pregnancy, carrying the child of Preston Ashworth for 32 weeks. She put a hand over the roundness of her stomach as if to protect the baby. The baby kicked hard as though it could feel that something was terribly wrong. She took out her phone, unlocked it, and just stared at the blank screen. She locked it and then unlocked it one more time. What was she supposed to do? Send a text message? Call him? Walk over there and ask him why his hand was on his director of special projects, as if he owned her? She locked the phone. Nothing on that device could solve this problem. Then, Eleanor Ashworth suddenly appeared at her side. Preston's mother moved through the party like a shark swimming through the ocean, quiet and threatening. Her fingers dug into Caroline's arm, hard enough to leave a mark. "Smile, dear," Eleanor said. Her voice was like smooth honey mixed with tiny pieces of broken glass. "People are looking at you." "Did you see that?" Caroline whispered, and her voice was shaking. "I saw you make a scene by dropping your glass." Preston, with Vivian. His hand was on her belly. Eleanor's grip got tighter, but her perfectly applied smile never changed. "Whatever you believe you saw, you are wrong. Ashworth women do not cause trouble. Ashworth women never make accusations. Ashworth women smile and wave and act as though their lives are absolutely perfect. But I know what I saw." Eleanor let go of her arm. Her smile turned colder. "You saw nothing? Now go to the ladies' room, fix your makeup, and when you return, you will behave like the loving wife of Preston Ashworth III. You are the woman who is carrying the future heir of this family. You will not embarrass me a second time." With those words, Eleanor floated away. She joined a group of rich donors near the auction tables. In just a few moments, she was laughing at a joke. She was the perfect hostess, the perfect high society wife, and the perfect monster. Caroline started to walk through the ballroom, feeling as if she were completely invisible. She went past Preston's business partners, who gave her short, polite nods. She went past the wives of his board members, who blew fake kisses at her. She went past the mayor and his wife, the governor and his girlfriend, and a senator whose name she could not bring to mind. Not one of them really saw her. She was just an accessory. She was Preston's pregnant wife, nothing more than a prop in the big show of his perfect life. Then she saw Rachel near the bar. Rachel Whitmore was her best friend from college. She was the only one in that whole room who really cared about her. Rachel was drinking a glass of whiskey. Her bright red hair was tied back in an elegant bun. The emerald green dress she had on was one she had borrowed from Caroline. She looked up as Caroline walked toward her. "Carrie, you look like you just saw a ghost." Rachel stopped. Her eyes grew narrow with worry. "What is wrong? I need to get out of here." "What happened?" "I need to get out of here right now, Rachel." Rachel did not ask for any more details. She did not ask another question. She just took out her phone and sent a fast text message to Marcus, their driver. The car would be there in 3 minutes. Caroline turned and walked toward the exit. The ballroom seemed to stretch on for miles. Every single step felt like she was trying to walk through deep water. She was moving through something thick like mud, through the broken pieces of the life she thought she had. To get to the exit, she needed to walk right past Preston. He was still with Vivian. He was still smiling, and he was still touching her. His hand had now shifted to the small of her back. It was a gesture that showed he owned her, the same way he used to touch Caroline before she became invisible to him. Caroline walked so close to them, she could smell his cologne. She was close enough to see a small red wine stain on his collar. She was close enough to hear Vivian say, "Preston, you are just something else." He never even looked up. He never saw his pregnant wife walking just 3 feet away from him. He did not see her in the slightest. "My gosh, I have been so foolish," Caroline thought. All the signs had been there for many months. the late nights he spent at the office, the new password he put on his phone, the way he stopped reaching for her in their bed. I saw all of it, and I pretended to see nothing. She finally made it to the very large doors. A doorman in a uniform pulled one open for her with a small bow. The cold November air hit her skin. It felt like being suddenly woken up from a long and awful nightmare. At the doorway, she stopped and turned around. She took a final look at the shining ballroom, at the crystal chandeliers, at the tables covered in silk, and at her husband, whispering secrets to another woman. Preston laughed one more time. It was his real laugh, the one Caroline once thought was only for her. It was the laugh she now understood had never belonged to her at all. The heavy door closed behind her without making a sound. Marcus was already standing next to the car. He opened the back door for her. His face showed only professional politeness, but she saw the kindness in his eyes. "Where to, Mrs. Ashworth?" Carolyn stopped for a moment. She could go home, back to the massive penthouse on Central Park West. She could go back to the bedroom she shared with a man who no longer noticed her. She could go back to the nursery she had painted, all by herself, because Preston was always too busy. No, not tonight. Never again. "Take me to my mother's house," she instructed, her voice calm and firm. The driver, Marcus, glanced back, his eyes wide with surprise. "Ma'am? That is a 3-hour drive upstate. I know how long it takes." She settled into the back of the car, the cold leather a shock against her skin. With a quiet click, she pulled the heavy door shut herself. Marcus turned around and said nothing more. The car glided away from the curb of the Metropolitan Club. In the reflection of the rearview mirror, she watched the glittering party lights shrink into the distance. The sound of the string quartet faded to nothing. The champagne, the polite laughter, and all the terrible lies simply melted away into the night. Caroline rested both hands on her pregnant belly. The baby was still, as if it was listening, as if it was waiting to see what would happen next. "Oh, I am so very sorry," she whispered to the child inside her, her palm flat against her stomach. "I am so sorry you have to go through this with me." But Caroline Ashworth was not going back. She was not going to go home, cry herself to sleep, and pretend that everything was fine in the morning. She was done with the perfect smiles and the elegant waves that defined her life as the perfect Ashworth wife. She was going to war. The dark, empty highway stretched out in front of them. Through the window, Carolyn watched the bright lights of the city give way to the softer lights of the suburbs. Soon, the suburbs disappeared, replaced by the rolling darkness of the countryside. As the landscape changed, her phone began to buzz. Preston's name lit up the screen. She ignored the buzzing phone. It buzzed a second time, and then a third. She saw Marcus watching her in the rearview mirror, but he kept his eyes on the road and remained perfectly silent. A great driver knows when to be invisible. The buzzing finally stopped, replaced by a voicemail icon and then a text message notification. It was from Preston, of course. "Where are you?" it read. "Your mother told me you left." Caroline stared at the words, her thumb hovering over the glass screen. She started to type a reply, but then erased it. She tried again and erased that one as well. What could she say? How could she possibly type the words, "I saw you with her. I saw you put your hand on her stomach. I saw the way you looked at her. It was the same way you used to look at me." She locked the phone. Let him wonder. Let him worry. The car drove past the hospital where she had her first ultrasound. The memory was so vivid, it felt like a punch to her gut. Preston had been sitting right beside her, holding her hand so tightly. He had actually cried when the doctor let them hear the baby's tiny, racing heartbeat. "We are finally going to be a family," he had promised, his voice thick with emotion. A real one, not like the family I had. That was just 5 months ago. That was before the late nights at the office became every night, before a new password appeared on his phone, and before a woman named Vivian Marlowe joined Ashworth Industries. Caroline had looked her up online, 29 years old, with a business degree from Stanford. The woman had no social media, no online presence, nothing. It was as if her entire digital life had been erased. At the time, Caroline thought it was just unusual, that maybe the woman was very private. Now, she understood the truth. You do not leave a trail of pictures and posts when you are sleeping with a married man. You do not leave any evidence when you are part of his secret world. His hand on her stomach was not a friendly gesture. It was a claim. It was a signal of a secret they shared, a symbol of a future they were building together. And then it hit her like a tidal wave. Oh my goodness, she is pregnant too. An icy chill spread through her body, and her hands began to tremble. Her own baby started to kick, responding to its mother's sudden wave of fear. Marcus, the driver, spoke in a low, gentle tone. "Ma'am, do you need me to pull over?" "No," she managed to say, her voice tight. "Just keep driving." She made herself take a slow, deep breath, in through her nose and out through her mouth, just like the instructor in her birthing class had taught her. She had gone to that class alone because Preston claimed he had an important meeting he could not miss. Another message flashed on her phone. It was Preston again. "Are you okay? You should have told me you were feeling sick." The nerve of that man. The absolute nerve. He had spent the entire party ignoring her, had not asked her to dance once, and had not even bothered to introduce her to the new donors. He had done nothing a husband was supposed to do, and now he was going to pretend to be the concerned spouse. She thought of all the nights she had spent lying awake in bed, waiting for the sound of his key in the door. She remembered the faint scent of another woman's perfume that clung to his suits. She had told herself it was her imagination. She had convinced herself she was just being paranoid. She had reasoned that pregnant women were hormonal and emotional, and that she should just be thankful for the comfortable life he gave her. But then, she had found the prenuptial agreement. It was 3 weeks ago, locked away in a drawer in his study. He had claimed to have lost the key, but Preston was not a man who lost things. He was a man who hid things. So she had picked the lock, a trick her mother had taught her during a rebellious phase in her youth, a skill she never imagined she would actually need. The document was 47 pages long, a confusing maze of legal terms, clauses, and subsections. But one part was perfectly clear. It was Article 12, the section on infidelity. It stated that if either party was proven to be unfaithful, the wronged party would receive 60% of their shared assets, and all other financial agreements would become void. The agreement laid it all out with cold, hard precision. Preston had told her it was just standard paperwork. He had called it a simple formality, something his lawyers insisted on. He had promised her it would never matter, because he would never, ever be unfaithful to her, and she had believed him. She had signed the papers without reading a single word. She had put all of her trust in the man who whispered promises of forever and placed a 5-carat diamond on her finger. I was so naive, she thought, so desperate for love, that I ignored every single warning sign. Then Caroline navigated to a folder on her phone. She had named it Insurance. Inside that folder was all the proof she had been gathering for months. There were screenshots of credit card statements with strange charges. There were pictures of receipts from expensive restaurants she had never been to. There were email confirmations for hotel rooms right here in their own city. For the past 3 months, she had not been sitting at home crying. She had been building her case. The day she found the prenup, she called her godfather, Theodore Callahan, who everyone called Teddy. He was the lawyer who managed her father's estate, and he had also set up Preston's trust fund years before she ever met him. She had asked him a few hypothetical questions about prenuptial agreements, about infidelity clauses, and what might happen if a wife discovered her billionaire husband was having an affair. Teddy's answers to her what-if questions had been very, very specific. Another text from Preston lit up the phone's screen. I am starting to get worried. Please call me. This time she typed a reply and sent it. I am fine. I just felt tired and needed some air. It was not a complete lie, but it was far from the truth. It was designed to keep him guessing. His reply was immediate. Come back to the party. We need to present the foundation check together. Of course, it was always about how things looked to the public. They had to be seen as the perfect, generous couple, donating $5 million to a children's hospital. But behind the scenes, one of them was stealing money from that very same charity. That was the other secret Caroline had uncovered. It was a secret so big, it made his affair look like a small problem. The Ashworth Foundation was not just a tool for good publicity, it was a front for laundering money. Donations would come in, but only a tiny fraction of that money ever reached a real charity. The rest of it would quietly vanish into secret bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. Teddy had guided her through the complicated financial documents. Her friend Rachel had helped confirm the suspicious transactions, and her mother, Margaret Brennan, a retired forensic accountant, had helped her follow the money trail. They had all been watching over her, waiting for the right moment to make a move, protecting her in ways she was only now starting to understand. I have already left, she texted back. I am sorry. I really was not feeling well. Then she powered her phone completely off. As the screen went black, she felt the final connection to her old life break. The car moved quietly through a small, sleeping town. They passed a closed gas station, a diner with a buzzing neon sign, and a church with a bright white steeple that glowed in the dark. The city lights blurred past, painting a picture of a world that had no idea Caroline Ashworth's life had just imploded. Or maybe this was the moment it truly began. She held proof that could do more than win a divorce from Preston Ashworth. It was a bomb powerful enough to obliterate his entire world. His company, his good name, and even his freedom would all go up in smoke. This was not just about ending a marriage, it was about bringing down an empire. Carolyn rested her forehead on the cold glass. Her unborn child settled quietly inside her. The shaking in her hands finally stopped, but there were no tears. She was done crying over that man. She had given years of her life to a man who saw her as nothing more than a pretty trophy. He wanted a wife to produce an heir and complete his perfect public image. But that chapter was now closed for good. She had 2 hours left in the car before reaching her mother's home. That was 2 hours to review every last detail of her plan to dismantle Preston Ashworth's life. She shut her eyes, not for rest, but to brace for the battle ahead. A single light glowed from the porch. Her mother, Margaret Brennan, always left it on when she was expecting her. The old farmhouse looked just the same, painted white with dark green shutters. The wind chimes her dad hung 3 decades ago still dangled from the eaves. A gentle melody from the wind chimes floated on the chilly November breeze. This was what a home felt like, unlike the cold, empty penthouse with its designer chairs and lonely rooms. Her driver, Marcus, steered the car onto the gravel driveway. The sound of the tires crunching was the last thing she heard before the engine went quiet. He broke the silence, asking, "Should I wait for you, ma'am?" "That will not be necessary, Marcus. I will let you know when I need to be picked up," she said. The thought, "if I ever leave this place," went unsaid. The front door swung open before her foot even touched the bottom step. Her mother, Margaret, was framed in the doorway, a woman of 60 with her silver hair in a neat braid. She was dressed comfortably in a flannel robe over a set of plain cotton pajamas. Her reading glasses were pushed up into her hair. "Well, you certainly got here when you got here," Maggie stated, not as a greeting, but as a simple observation. Carolyn moved slowly up the wooden steps. Her ankles were throbbing, and a constant, low pain radiated from her back. With the baby lower now, every motion felt like a huge effort. The moment she was within her mother's reach, the wall she had built all night crumbled. Tears she had suppressed at the gala in the car, and for months of faking a happy life, finally spilled over. Maggie simply pulled her daughter into a firm embrace. She just held her, saying nothing, as Caroline cried onto her shoulder. The wind chimes played their soft song, and far away, an owl called out from an old oak. The night air was surprisingly mild, like a comforting wrap. "Come on inside," Maggie said after a while. "I will make us some tea." The kitchen was a welcome haven of warmth. A fire in the old wood stove popped and hissed in the corner. Above them hung the same copper pots her grandmother had owned, the ones her mother taught her to cook with. Maggie went about her task with an easy, practiced rhythm. She put water in the kettle, spooned chamomile leaves from a container, and reached for the honey pot shaped like a bear. From the cupboard, she pulled down 2 mismatched blue mugs, each with small nicks on the edge that made them too precious to discard. Carolyn lowered herself into a chair at the familiar kitchen table. So much of her life had happened right here. Battles with math problems, countless morning meals, and whispered secrets about a first crush, a first broken heart, and finally, the news of her engagement to Preston. Her mother had never been happy about Preston. She had asked sharp questions that Caroline had dismissed at the time. "What do you really know about this man's background? Has he introduced you to anyone in his family? What is your intuition telling you?" Caroline's intuition had been shouting at her to get away, but she had refused to listen. The charm and wealth of a handsome billionaire had blinded her to everything else. He knew how to make her feel like she was the only woman on earth. "I should have trusted you," she thought. Looking at her mother, she should have trusted her mom, trusted her own gut feeling, that nagging suspicion that something was not right from the start. The kettle began to shriek, and Maggie poured the boiling water onto the tea. For 4 minutes, they sat without speaking as the tea brewed. The quiet was filled by the tick-tock of the clock on the wall and the soft whisper of the fire. As the tea turned a rich amber, Maggie pushed a warm mug toward her daughter. Carolyn wrapped her cold hands around it, soaking in the warmth. "Mom," she began, her voice rough from tears, "I have something to tell you." "I know, honey. I already know." Caroline's face was a mask of confusion as she looked at her mother. "Know what?" In response, Maggie reached down beside her chair and lifted a heavy folder. It was overflowing with documents, papers threatening to escape. She placed it on the table with a solid final sound. "I worked for 32 years as a forensic accountant. I know what financial crime looks like. Your husband has been manipulating the finances of his company since well before he met you." Caroline stared at the folder, speechless. "You knew all this time?" "I suspected something was wrong," Maggie said softly, correcting her. "So I began to dig a little. And this is what I found." Maggie opened the folder, showing pages of spreadsheets, bank records, and corporate filings. "The Ashworth Foundation has illegally moved $14 million into hidden accounts overseas in only the last 3 years. And that glamorous fundraiser you were just at? By next week, 70% of the money raised tonight will be in a fake company registered in the Cayman Islands." The figures on the documents blurred together. Caroline had found some of this herself, like tiny pieces of a giant, ugly puzzle. But looking at her mother's thorough and irrefutable proof made it all feel horribly solid. "Why did not you tell me?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Because you needed to discover it on your own," Maggie answered, her tone gentle but resolute. "If I had shown you this sooner, you would not have accepted it. You would have made excuses for him. You would have insisted I was wrong, just being a worried mother who was meddling." Caroline said nothing, because the words were true. She had always made excuses for Preston. She did it when friends wondered about his coldness, or when work associates repeated nasty gossip. She even made excuses to herself late at night. Then Maggie said, "But that is not all." She flipped to a new part of the folder. This part contained only pictures. There was a woman climbing into a sports car, a man opening a door for her, a little boy on a playground swing. The woman's name is Vivian Marlowe, and she is more than just his girlfriend. The world seemed to stop spinning for Caroline. What do you mean? He has been supporting her financially for 3 years. It began 2 years before you were even in the picture, and they have a son who is 2 years old. Maggie stopped talking, allowing the terrible reality to settle in the air between them. He has a son. Preston sees him every second weekend. That is when he tells you he is on the golf course. The kitchen began to tilt and sway around her. The mug fell from her shaking fingers. Warm tea pooled on the tabletop, but she did not feel the heat on her skin. A son. Preston had another child, a whole other family. He was living a complete lie, a second life parallel to the one he shared with her. No, she whispered, the word a gut reaction. No, it is not possible. He could not do that. The DNA is a perfect match, Maggie stated. Her voice was level and factual, just like when she testified in court. I brought in a private detective 6 months ago. He collected DNA samples from both of them for testing. The boy is 100% Preston's son. A sick feeling rose in Caroline's throat. She instinctively put her hands over her pregnant belly, a useless gesture to protect her baby. This was the baby she believed was Preston's first, his legacy, the start of their family. But her baby was not the first. He was the second, or maybe even the third. The thought made her feel cold. How many other secrets did Preston have? How many other families were hidden away? His name is William, Maggie went on gently. He had his second birthday this past September. Preston gave him a little electric car. He was at Vivian's place all day assembling it for him. The month hit Caroline like a physical blow. In September, she had been 6 months pregnant. Preston claimed he was at a work conference in Chicago. She never questioned it for a moment. She never, ever questioned him. The most difficult thing is to accept that deep down, I think I always knew something was wrong. There was always a little doubt. Finally, Caroline spoke. What happens next? Her voice sounded strange and empty, like it was coming from far away. That, her mother said, is completely up to you. Maggie shut the folder with a sharp, final sound. You are at a crossroads. You can go home to him, pretend you are clueless, have your child, and keep playing the part of Mrs. Preston Ashworth. That is, until he finds someone new and younger to take your place. And the alternative? Caroline asked. The alternative is that you fight for yourself. You use every last page in this folder and every secret you hold to bring that man to ruin. You can take away his wealth, his business, and his very freedom. Caroline looked at her mother, the woman who raised her all by herself after her father's death. The woman who put in 70-hour work weeks so she could go to a good school. The woman who taught her both how to pick a lock and how to understand a company's finances. And she was the same woman who had taught her a golden rule. Never, ever put your faith in a man who refuses to show you his tax documents. There is something else, Caroline said. I uncovered a detail you may not be aware of. It is about the family trust. A slow smile began to grow on Maggie's face. You discovered that, did you? Your lawyer Teddy phoned me 3 weeks ago, shortly after you started asking him all of those hypothetical questions. The morality clause. It is hidden deep within the trust documents. Any heir to the Ashworth wealth who causes a public scandal must give up their entire inheritance. Preston's father included it 20 years ago to curb his son's out-of-control behavior at university. Preston does not even know it is there. That is correct. Dominic never informed him about it. He assumed the mere threat of it would be enough to make him behave. Maggie just shook her head, astonished. He really did not understand the depths of his own son's foolishness. Caroline's baby was not the first child Preston had fathered. It was not even his second. And before the next sunrise, Preston Ashworth was not only going to be without a wife, he was on the verge of losing everything he had. The large grandfather clock in the hallway struck 3 in the morning. Caroline had now been awake for 21 hours without a break. Her entire body ached for rest, but her thoughts were moving at a frantic pace. The kitchen table looked like a war room, buried beneath huge piles of paperwork. The only illumination in the darkened room was the glow from the laptop screens. A small army of empty coffee mugs littered the tabletop. Rachel showed up at 2 in the morning, after leaving a charity event early by claiming she had a migraine. She drove directly from the city with her laptop and a secret she had been holding on to for the last 6 months. "I was investigating Ashworth Industries for a news story," Rachel confessed, her voice filled with shame. "For the last half year. I was going to let you know, Carrie. I just had to gather all my proof first." Caroline's reply was empty and detached. Everybody was trying to protect me. Everybody but the man I pledged my life to. Rachel added her own stacks of files to the table. They were filled with financial reports, printed out emails, and notes from her interviews. She had managed to find former employees who had been given money to sign non-disclosure agreements. "The corruption is much worse than just the foundation," Rachel explained. "For several years, Ashworth Industries has been losing its investors' money." Preston took control from his father 5 years ago. Since then, the company has secretly moved at least $23 million. A large amount of that money was deposited into his personal bank accounts. Some of it went to Vivian, and the rest was used to hide his earlier crimes. Carolyn gazed at the papers. She saw names she did not recognize, and numbers that made her feel dizzy. It was an elaborate web of fake corporations and foreign bank accounts that stretched across 3 different continents. How could nobody have ever found out about this? She wondered aloud. "Oh, some people did," Rachel replied. She pointed to a list of names on a page. These were all employees who started asking too many questions. Every last one of them was fired within 6 months. Most were pressured to sign secrecy agreements in exchange for a settlement. A few of them even tried reporting it to the authorities. But their official complaints just vanished. Vanished? How could that happen? The Ashworth family has some very powerful connections. Dominic was a very generous donor to 3 separate attorneys general. Preston was simply using the family's old methods, Rachel said, her expression grim. When you have that much money, you can make any problem disappear. I deserved better than this. I deserved to know the truth. A single powerful idea started to take shape in Caroline's thoughts. She held onto it like a person adrift at sea clings to a piece of wreckage. Maggie came back from her office carrying another large pile of documents. I located the custody paperwork. "What custody paperwork?" Caroline asked, confused. Maggie's face was hard as a rock. "The papers Preston's lawyers were preparing? He was planning to divorce you the moment the baby was born. He was getting ready to sue you for full custody of your child. His plan was to claim that you were mentally and emotionally unstable." A profound quiet settled over the room. Even Rachel, who had just outlined millions of dollars in corporate crime, looked completely stunned. "He was going to take my baby away from me," Caroline whispered, finding it hard to believe the words. "He was definitely going to make an attempt," Maggie stated. She slid the legal papers across the table to Caroline. "His lawyers were collecting things to use against you, your anxiety attacks during the pregnancy. That one time you called the doctor, worried that the baby was no longer moving. The sleeping pills you were prescribed 3 months ago." Carolyn remembered getting those pills. She had been having terrible nightmares. She would wake up suddenly at 4 in the morning with her heart racing. Preston had suggested she talk to a professional. He had even recommended a psychiatrist who was a personal friend. That doctor was most likely feeding every single detail of their sessions directly to Preston's legal counsel. "The whole thing was a setup," she said quietly, "from the very start. He did not want a genuine family with me. He just wanted a child from a respectable woman to be his heir." "Someone who would present well in photographs," Rachel commented, "and someone who lacked the money to put up a fight. Your mother is financially secure, but she does not have the kind of massive fortune the Ashworths possess." Preston likely figured You would accept whatever small settlement he decided to offer you. And after that, he thought you would just go away without a fuss. He thought wrong, Caroline said with new determination. She grabbed her phone, opened her private files, and started scrolling through months of evidence. I have recordings of him lying about his location. I have credit card bills for hotel rooms and expensive gifts he certainly never gave to me. I have pictures of him and Vivian at restaurants where he claimed he was attending business dinners. She looked over at her mother and her best friend. They were the two women who believed in her, especially when she had stopped believing in herself. Between the three of us, we have more than enough to completely ruin him. Now the only question is how totally we want to destroy him. The clock on the mantel showed it was 3:30. The last embers in the fireplace were giving off a faint red glow. Outside, the very first sign of dawn was appearing over the hills. Caroline's phone started to buzz. She had turned it back on about an hour earlier. A steady flow of notifications was now lighting up the screen. She had 16 missed calls from Preston. There were 12 voicemails, and she had 27 text messages. The tone of the messages changed from worried to furious, and finally to openly hostile. "Put the voicemails on speaker," Rachel said. "We need to have a record of his mental state." Caroline tapped the speaker icon. The first message began to play. Caroline: "Where on earth are you? Your mother informed me that you just left without saying anything. Please give me a call." His voice was normal, maybe a little annoyed, but still under control. The second message started. "I do not like being made to look like a fool. The foundation fundraiser was very important. People noticed that you were not there." The anger was starting to show, but he was still focused on how things looked to others. By the time they reached the fifth message, his voice had changed. "This is ridiculous. You are overreacting again. Whatever it is you think you saw, you are mistaken." He was talking down to her now, using that same patronizing tone he always used whenever she questioned him. The eighth message sounded more like a threat. "If you fail to call me back very soon, I will have no choice but to assume you are having another one of your episodes. Do you remember what Dr. Reynolds said about managing your anxiety?" He was trying to manipulate her, setting the stage for his false narrative about her being unstable. The 12th and final voicemail played. "I am getting in touch with Dr. Pennington. It is clear that the pregnancy hormones are affecting your better judgment. You must come home this instant." He was in full command mode now, trying to turn her own doctor into a weapon to be used against her. Rachel was recording all of it on her own phone. He is already building his case. If this ever went to court, he would try to prove she was unstable from the beginning. "In that case, we will make sure this never gets anywhere near a courtroom," Maggie said, her voice as cold as ice. "We will make sure he has nothing left to fight for." Caroline looked down at her cell phone. She saw the face of the man she had married, the man who was the father of her unborn child, the monster she had slept beside for 4 years. "Call Teddy," she said, her voice firm. "Let him know that it is time." The phone call did not last long. Theodore Callahan answered on the very first ring, even though it was the middle of the night. It was as if he had been waiting for her to call. "I was anticipating this," he told her. "Your prenuptial agreement contains a clause about infidelity. With the evidence you now have, you are entitled to claim 60% of all the wealth accumulated during your marriage." "Tell me about the trust," Caroline said. "The morality clause is unbreakable. Dominic insisted on it. If there is any verified scandal, the heir loses everything. The inheritance vanishes completely. The family fortune, the company stock, every single property. It all gets handed over to charity." "Does Preston know about this?" she asked. The lawyer answered, "He has no idea. His father kept it a secret. He thought the possibility alone would be enough to keep his son behaving." Caroline stared at the papers covering her table. They showed proof of his cheating and details of his financial crimes. It was a map of a life built on a mountain of lies. I have one last question, Teddy, Caroline said. What happens to the Ashworth Foundation after the world finds out about the fraud? He replied, the real money will be frozen during the investigation. Whatever is left over would probably be given to actual charities. Teddy stopped for a moment. On the other hand, he continued, it could be put under new leadership. Someone could make sure the money is actually used to help people. He gave her a meaningful look. Someone like you, if you are interested. You were a victim here, which gives you a legal right to step in. And your experience running nonprofits makes you the perfect person for the job. Before she met Preston, Caroline had a job she loved at a charity for children's literacy. He had talked her into quitting. He told her she would never have to work again, that he would handle everything. She realized now it was just another way for him to control her, something she had once mistaken for love. Get the papers ready, she commanded. All of them. The divorce papers, the official complaint for the government, and the notice for the family trust. I want everything ready by the morning. I will get it done, he promised her. She ended the call. The only sounds in the kitchen were the steady ticking of the clock and the soft crackle of the fire. By dawn, Caroline was not just leaving Preston. She intended to completely remove him from the Ashworth family story. The dark sky slowly softened to a pale gray with a touch of pink. A new day was starting. The most difficult night of her life was finally over. Her phone buzzed and Preston's name flashed on the screen. She had been waiting for this call for hours, both fearing it and needing it to happen. You should probably take that, Rachel said softly. We need to know what he plans to do next. Caroline took a deep breath, composed herself, and answered the call. Where in the world are you? Preston's voice was sharp and commanding. It was the same voice he used on his employees who had failed him, and now he was directing it at her. I am in a safe place, Caroline answered, her voice calm. That is not what I asked. My mother is embarrassed. You vanished without a word to anyone. Now the whole town is gossiping. Then let them gossip, she replied. A long pause followed. She could almost feel him thinking, trying to figure out his next strategy. Caroline, he said, his voice lowering to a threatening growl, you will come home right now. No? What did you just say to me? That one simple word seemed to make the world stand still. Caroline had never truly said no to Preston before. She had argued with him, she had reasoned with him, but she had never just refused him. I said no, Preston. For the very first time in our marriage, I am telling you no, and I will not be coming back. She heard a sharp, violent crash on his end of the call, like a glass shattering against a wall. Preston always had a terrible temper. He kept it hidden from the public, but behind closed doors, things were often smashed. Do you really think you can just leave me? He laughed, but it was a harsh, nasty sound. You are walking away with nothing. Have you forgotten about the prenuptial agreement you signed? You will not get a penny. You and our new baby will be homeless. I remember the agreement, Preston. I remember every last word. I also remember the section about cheating. The one you said did not matter, because you would never be unfaithful. The line became perfectly still. I also remember the morality clause in your family's trust, the one your father included. The clause that you do not even know exists. This time, the silence on the other end was even longer. She could picture him standing there, frozen with fear, frantically trying to guess how much she knew. By the way, Caroline added, her voice staying perfectly steady. How is your other little boy? He must be almost 3 years old now. William Wright, the son you see every other weekend when you lie and claim you are going golfing. The call disconnected without another sound. Caroline looked down at her phone. Her hands were trembling and her heart was racing, but she could not help the small smile that appeared on her face. She had played her card. Preston had until dawn to give up. She knew he never would. The next 2 hours were a whirlwind of activity. Teddy sent the legal documents through email. Rachel put the finishing touches on her story. Maggie sorted through all the financial proof. Carolyn went over everything one last time, signing papers where needed and giving her approval for every single part of the plan. At 6 in the morning, she officially filed for divorce. The papers were sent out electronically, landing instantly in the inboxes of Preston's lawyer, the family's trust manager, and the federal whistleblower hotline. At 6:30, her phone began to ring. It was not Preston this time. It was his father, Dominic Ashworth, and his voice was cold as ice. "What on earth do you think you are doing?" he barked. "Good morning to you too, Dominic. I guess Preston has already told you about our talk." "You are making a huge mistake," he snarled. "You do not know who you are dealing with." "Oh, I know exactly who I am dealing with," she shot back. "I am dealing with a family whose entire fortune was built on a web of lies. A husband who had a whole secret family while he played the part of a devoted spouse. And a father who is more concerned with his public image than he is with the truth. You will live to regret this. I will personally see to it." "You will see to what, exactly? Are you going to file a lawsuit against me? Threaten me? Are you going to attempt to prove that I am an unfit mother?" Carolyn's voice was powerful and did not shake. "I have evidence of every illegal act your family has ever committed. I have documentation from the last 10 years. I have financial statements, recorded conversations, and people who are willing to testify. If anything happens to me or my child, all of it gets released. It will be delivered to every news station, every newspaper, and every government office." The line was dead quiet. "Your son is not just losing his wife, Dominic. He is about to lose his money, his company, and his freedom. The only thing left to decide is if you want to fall with him." She hung up the phone before he could say another word. Rachel just looked at her, her mouth hanging open. "I have never seen you act like this before." "I have never been this furious before," Caroline admitted, sinking down into a chair at the kitchen table. A wave of pure exhaustion suddenly washed over her. She became aware of just how long she had been awake. "Or perhaps I have been," she said, her voice now quiet. "Maybe this anger has been growing inside me for years, and I just made the choice to ignore it." Maggie placed a fresh mug of coffee in front of her and gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "That anger is a good thing," Maggie said softly. "It shows you are finally standing up for yourself." But as her mother spoke, Caroline felt the anger start to change into something else. The fury was just on the surface. Beneath it was a deep well of sadness for everything she had lost, for the life she had dreamed of. After everything he had put her through, a part of her had genuinely loved Preston. She had overlooked so many warning signs and pushed away her doubts in the middle of the night. She had loved the man she believed him to be, the character he played so well. But that man was never real. She was grieving for a ghost. At 7 in the morning, a large black sedan pulled up to the curb in front of Maggie's house. Carolyn saw it from the window. 3 men in expensive suits got out. They were the kind of suits Preston's lawyers wore when they were sent to scare someone. They walked up the path and knocked on the door. They looked slick and sure of themselves, obviously expecting to handle a hysterical wife who was making a scene. They had no clue what was really waiting for them on the other side of that door. Caroline answered the door herself. She was 8 months pregnant, dressed in an old sweatshirt and a pair of borrowed jeans. Her hair was a mess, and her eyes were puffy from not sleeping. In spite of how she looked, she had never felt so in control. "Mrs. Ashworth," the main lawyer began, his tone cold and formal, "your husband has asked that you come home immediately. He is willing to forgive you for this minor outburst." "Forgive me?" Caroline almost laughed out loud. "I have no need for his forgiveness." "He also wanted us to tell you," the lawyer continued, "that if you move forward with legal action, he will prove in court that you are an unstable mother. He will use your pregnancy hormones and your recent, unpredictable behavior against you. He has witnesses prepared to say you left a party without any good reason," the lawyer warned. They will all testify that you have been emotionally unstable. In that case, Caroline replied calmly, you can tell him I have a forensic accountant, a top investigative reporter, and the very same lawyer who drafted his family's trust. He should also know that I have already filed all the necessary paperwork. The lawyer blinked, looking completely thrown off. Filed what? Everything, Caroline said, a small smile playing on her lips. The divorce papers, which contain clear proof of his affair, a formal complaint regarding his charity fraud, and a very detailed email to his father that explains the morality clause. The lawyers looked at one another. A silent wave of doubt and maybe even a little fear passed between them. Mr. Ashworth is ready to negotiate a settlement, the main lawyer said, choosing his next words with great care. There is nothing left to negotiate, Caroline answered. This game is finished, and I have already won. She then shut the door firmly in their faces. Through the window, she saw them hurrying back to their car. They were on their phones, waving their hands in the air with agitation, but their car did not move. They were waiting for new orders. Preston's deadline to surrender was sunrise. The sun was up. The real battle was just starting. The lawyers returned to her door 3 more times. Each time their offer was higher, climbing to $20 million. Then the offer rose to $30 million, and finally $50 million for her to drop the whole thing. Caroline refused every single offer. You know, you could always just accept the money, Rachel mentioned. They had relocated to the living room as the kitchen table was buried under stacks of papers. $50 million would allow you to begin a new life anywhere in the world. This was never about getting money, Caroline said, her gaze fixed on the black car and the desperate men outside. This is about doing what is right. Doing the right thing can come at a great cost, Maggie cautioned. It can wear you down to nothing, and sometimes you still do not succeed in the end. Then I will wear myself down trying, Caroline replied with determination. The morning news show came on, and Rachel increased the volume. A financial journalist was talking about strange activity related to the Ashworth Industries stock. Sources within the company say the stock has been extremely volatile today, the reporter announced. There are whispers of a federal investigation, but the company is declining to comment. It was beginning. The first cracks were showing in the foundation of the family's empire. At 9:30, Bennett Cross called. He was the chief financial officer for the company. Caroline remembered him from various company events. He was a nervous, quiet man who always seemed to be checking over his shoulder. Carolyn, he started, his voice a panicked whisper. We have to talk, he said. How did you get this number? She asked, her voice filled with astonishment. I have had it for a couple of years. Since that company holiday party, he stopped for a moment. I tried to warn you that evening. I wanted to tell you about the money, about what Preston was doing. But you did not understand. The memory of that night suddenly rushed back to her. She pictured Bennett trying to talk to her, stumbling over his words. At the time, she just thought he was socially awkward. Well, I understand now, she told him. I have proof, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. I made copies of everything Preston thought he'd deleted. Every secret account. I have held on to them for 3 years. His voice broke on the last word. I stayed with the company because I believed I could make things better from the inside, to shield the employees who had no idea what was happening. But it only got worse. Why are you deciding to tell me this now? Because you are the only one who has a real chance to stop him, Bennett said, taking a deep breath. And because you were always kind to me at those corporate parties. Everyone else acted like I was not there, but you always asked about my family. You even remembered my daughter's name. Caroline had no recollection of these small acts of kindness, these brief connections she made while playing the part of Mrs. Preston Ashworth. I will be a witness, Bennett declared. Whatever you need, I will tell them the whole story. Thank you, Bennett. Thank you for having the courage to fight. Someone needed to, he replied. As soon as she ended the call, she saw that Rachel was already writing notes. Having the chief financial officer testify changes everything, Rachel said. This is a statement from an insider. It grants us access to records we never would have discovered. He is also a man who is risking his entire career to do the right thing. Caroline felt something shift inside of her. He spent years trying to fix the company, just like I spent years trying to fix my marriage. We were both caught in the same trap, one built by the very same man. When the doorbell rang, Caroline's whole body went rigid. She expected more lawyers holding more settlement offers, trying to buy her silence. But the individual on her doorstep was not an attorney. It was Eleanor Ashworth. Preston's mother stood there, looking absolutely perfect. She wore a designer coat, carried a Chanel purse, and had on her trademark pearls. She was the very picture of a high society matriarch. Maggie moved in front of Caroline protectively. I do not think you are welcome here. I am not here to create any trouble. Eleanor's voice was different. It was softer and more human than Caroline had ever heard before. I am here to help. Caroline stepped out from behind her mother. Why in the world would you want to help me? For just a moment, Eleanor's flawless composure seemed to crack. It was just long enough for Caroline to see the deep weariness she had been hiding. Because my grandchild deserves a better life than what Preston can provide. Because I have spent 40 years cleaning up the messes of the Ashworth men, and I am finished. Because I am aware of all their secrets, and it is time the world knew them too. She held out a small silver flash drive that seemed heavy with secrets. Bank records, offshore accounts, private deals, everything Dominic has kept hidden for decades. Eleanor's hand was trembling just a little. I married into this family when I was only 22 years old. I have been living in their world ever since. Perhaps this is how I can begin to make things right. Caroline accepted the small drive. Why are you doing this now? Why did you not do this a long time ago? Because a long time ago, I was terrified of Dominic. I was scared of losing my place in society, of becoming nobody. Tears began to well up in Eleanor's eyes. But my grandson will be here soon, and I will not allow him to be brought up in the same poisonous environment that ruined my own son. It was the most truthful statement Caroline had ever heard from Eleanor. I cannot forgive you, Caroline told her plainly. Not for all the years you knew what was happening, and for every time you told me to just put on a smile and play my part. I am not asking for you to forgive me. I am asking for a chance to do one thing right. Eleanor straightened her shoulders. Whatever you need, whatever it takes to tear that family down, I will assist you, even if it means my own ruin. The doorbell had been silent for some time. The lawyer's car had left. The morning air was quiet, filled only with the sound of birds. Caroline looked down at the flash drive in her palm, then up at her mother-in-law's tired face, and she considered the life she was about to take apart. There would be no surrender, no deals, and no turning back. Come on inside, she said. We have a lot of work to do. They worked together until noon. Then Eleanor left, Rachel left, and even Maggie went to her office to examine the new information. Caroline was finally by herself. She went upstairs to the bedroom from her childhood. The pink wallpaper she had chosen when she was 12 years old still lined the walls. The quilt her grandmother had sewn by hand was still on the bed. The window still had the same view of the fields she used to stare at as a girl, dreaming of a new future. She had run away from here, all the way to a penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. She had been given a 5-carat diamond ring and a marriage that was constructed on a foundation of lies. The initial surge of adrenaline was gone, and her anger had subsided. All that remained was a profound, aching sadness. Caroline sat down on the edge of the little bed. She placed her hands on her stomach and felt the soft kick of her daughter. I loved him, she whispered to the empty room. I really and truly loved him. How could I have been so mistaken? And then the tears began to fall. These were not the pretty tears from a movie scene, but harsh, ugly sobs that shook her entire body. Years of hidden pain came flooding out of her. She cried for the wedding she thought was a fairy tale. She cried for the honeymoon in Bali, where Preston had acted so devoted. She cried for the night he proposed on his yacht, under the stars, promising her a forever that was never real. She wept for the pregnancy test she had to see by herself because he was away on another work trip. She cried thinking about the ultrasound appointments he always had an excuse to miss. She cried for the nursery she had painted and furnished alone while he was spending time with Vivian. Then she cried for the woman she used to be before him. She was once a strong, independent person, happy with her job at a nonprofit, her little apartment, and her simple life. That person was gone, buried under 4 years of Preston Ashworth's judgments, his busy social life, and his constant demands. At some point, she had become a complete stranger to herself. The baby kicked again, this time with more energy, as if it could feel the stress flowing through Caroline. She made herself take a long, deep breath to try and calm down. She had to remember that a little life was counting on her to stay strong. Her mother, Maggie, appeared silently in the doorway. She said nothing, but simply walked over and sat on the bed next to her, holding her daughter as she let the tears fall. "I wasted 4 years of my life, Mom." "You did not waste them," Maggie said, gently stroking her hair. "You survived them. That is a very big difference." "I should have seen the truth earlier. I should have left him a long time ago." "Perhaps," Maggie replied. "Or perhaps you needed to wait for this very moment. To Dennett, this is the moment when you finally found the courage to stand up for yourself and fight." Maggie's voice was even and calm. The version of Caroline who married him could never have handled this. You had to become someone stronger first. Caroline considered her mother's words. She thought of the young woman who had signed a prenuptial agreement without giving it a second look. The woman who accepted every lie because she wanted so badly for them to be real. That woman had been fragile and desperate for affection. This new woman was neither of those things. "I am so scared," Caroline confessed in a quiet voice. "I am scared of what will happen now, scared of raising a child by myself, scared of being known as the woman who brought down the entire Ashworth dynasty." "That is perfectly fine. Being scared means you understand how serious this is." Maggie shifted to look her daughter directly in the eyes. "But you will not be facing this by yourself. You have me, and you have Rachel. You have Teddy and Bennett, and you even have Eleanor, bless her heart. But what if I fail? And what if you succeed?" Caroline did not have an answer to that. She had not allowed herself to even think about success. She had not let herself dream of a life beyond the next few challenging hours. "Go and take a hot shower," Maggie suggested. "Change into some fresh clothes and have something to eat. After that, we can figure out our next move." She left the room, and Caroline remained seated alone for another minute. She took a moment to gather her strength, preparing herself for the day ahead. The shower was hot, so hot the spray almost burned her skin. She stood beneath the rushing water until her skin was flushed pink, until all her tears had been washed away, and until she felt truly clean, for the first time in years. She dressed in clothes from her old life. A pair of jeans fit snugly over her growing stomach, and she wore a big sweatshirt from her college days. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. She did not know the woman who stared back at her, but maybe that was for the best. She had spent 4 years trying to be Caroline Ashworth. It was finally time to remember the person she was before all of this began. By 3 in the afternoon, the story was everywhere. A person who wished to remain unknown had leaked the documents to all the major financial news networks. The Securities and Exchange Commission immediately announced it was opening a formal investigation into Ashworth Industries. The company's stock value dropped 15% in just 1 hour. Members of the board were quitting, and the company lawyers were running for cover. Carolyn watched it all unfold from the safety of Maggie's living room. Rachel sat beside her, her phone buzzing constantly with messages from her editor. "I did not release anything," Rachel promised. "My strategy was to wait until morning. I wanted to give Preston more time to make his situation even worse." So who could have done this? A short text message from Teddy provided the shocking answer. It was Eleanor. In the end, she had made the choice to protect her future grandchild instead of her own son. Caroline could only look at her phone in total shock. This was from her mother-in-law, the same woman who had always told her to just smile and act like nothing was wrong. For 40 years, she had cared more about how things looked than about the truth. But when it really counted, she chose her family over a perfect public image. On the television, a news channel was broadcasting live from outside the Ashworth Industries building. A huge crowd of reporters had formed as shocked employees walked out of the offices. The entire corporate empire was falling apart right in front of them. Then a picture of Preston appeared on the screen. It was an old photograph from a happier time, where he looked handsome. He was so charming, the perfect son from the perfect family. The news anchor's voice described his incredible downfall. "We are receiving reports that Preston Ashworth III could face criminal charges for both charity fraud and embezzlement. His wife filed for divorce just this morning, claiming infidelity and financial wrongdoing. His wife. For a little while longer, that title still belonged to her. Right at that moment, her phone started to ring. It was Preston calling once more, but this time she picked up. "Carrie?" His voice was completely different, sounding utterly broken. All of his confidence was gone. "Please, I can explain everything." "No, you cannot. The company. My father. You have no clue about the kind of pressure I was under. I understand that you faced a choice every single day, and every single day you made the choice to lie to my face. I love you." Caroline nearly laughed, but it might have been a sob. That word had zero meaning coming from him. It probably never did. "No, Preston. You loved the idea of me, the perfect wife, the perfect family picture, the image you needed to protect for your career." Her voice was completely calm and unwavering. "You never loved me. You do not even know the real me. I can change. We can go to therapy. We can start over. It is much too late for that. It was too late the second you put your hand on that other woman's belly." The other end of the line was completely silent. Then she heard a sound she had never heard from Preston Ashworth in her life. He was crying. "Please," he begged, "I am losing everything. You already lost me, and it happened months ago. You just were not paying attention." She hung up the phone. The news broadcast kept going, sharing more details, showing more video clips, and bringing in more experts to analyze the collapse of a powerful family empire. At 5 in the evening, the board of Ashworth Industries held an emergency meeting. At 6:30, they made an announcement that Preston had been fired as chief executive officer. At 7, Dominic Ashworth released a public statement criticizing his son's behavior and separating the family name from the scandal. At 8 o'clock, Teddy arrived with the documents that would legally end her marriage. "They are giving you everything you asked for," he said with a warm smile. The terms were written out in plain language. 60% of all their shared assets, just as their prenuptial agreement stated. Caroline would get full custody of their child, and Preston would not be allowed to visit until he completed a full psychological review. The apartment in New York, the vacation house in Florida, and total control of the family foundation would all now be hers. Caroline reviewed the documents, reading each line very carefully. It was everything she had wanted, everything she had been fighting for. "Preston is also being cut off from his inheritance because of a morality clause," Teddy added. "The family trust made it official this afternoon. He was now basically broke, aside from any money he had managed to hide in accounts overseas. And even those accounts were now frozen, while the Securities and Exchange Commission conducted its investigation. He would be fortunate to even be able to hire a public defender." Caroline signed the documents, her hand moving with perfect steady confidence. Her friend Maggie opened a bottle of wine, but they did not clink their glasses together in a toast. This was not a moment for a party. It was simply an ending, the final page of a chapter being turned so that a new one could start. At 9 o'clock that night, Rachel's article was published online. It was a detailed report that uncovered the secret family, the financial crimes, and all the manipulation presented in sharp, crushing detail. By midnight, Preston Ashworth's reputation was completely and totally destroyed. Caroline stood by the window, looking out into the dark night. The stars were shining brightly in the sky, and the wind chimes played a gentle song. She had actually done it. She had won against unbelievable odds, against a billion-dollar company, and against a family that had been paying its way out of trouble for many generations. She placed both hands on her belly, and her daughter answered with a soft kick. "It is all finished now," she whispered to her baby. "He cannot hurt us ever again." But as she spoke those words, she understood that was not entirely true. The legal fight would probably drag on for months, or maybe even years. There would be more meetings with lawyers, more days spent in court, and more evaluations for custody. Preston would definitely put up a fight. His father had enough money to fund endless legal battles. The Ashworth empire would keep running, even with its star player sidelined. But Caroline possessed a power they could never buy. She had the truth on her side. She was surrounded by people who truly cared for her. Most importantly, she would raise a daughter who would know her mother was a survivor, not a victim. For Caroline, that was not just enough. It was everything. A week after, Caroline sat in Dr. Pennington's office for a routine appointment. The baby was doing wonderfully, kicking up a storm and seemingly ready to make her debut. Dr. Pennington spoke softly. "You have endured an unbelievable level of stress. So, how are you managing?" the doctor asked. "I feel better than I think I'm supposed to," Caroline answered after a moment's thought. "Is that weird? Shouldn't I be more devastated by everything that happened?" There is no right or wrong way to handle grief. Everyone experiences it in their own way, Dr. Pennington explained while making a note in her file. "But honestly, I have not seen you this peaceful in a very long time." It was the absolute truth. The crushing anxiety that had followed her for months was finally gone. She no longer had sleepless nights, a mind that would not stop racing, or that nagging sense that something was deeply wrong. "I just kept blaming it on pregnancy hormones," Caroline admitted. "All of that worry. Preston always said it was only the hormones." "What you felt was a completely normal response to a terrible situation," the doctor assured her. "Your body knew something was not right, even when your brain did not want to believe it." Caroline remembered all those nights she lay awake, scrolling through her phone at 3 in the morning. She recalled faking sleep when Preston finally crept into the house. Her instincts had been shouting at her, but she had refused to hear them. She vowed to herself then and there to always trust her gut from now on. That very afternoon, she decided she had to see Vivian Marlowe. It was a decision no one supported. Not Maggie, not Rachel, and not Teddy. Even Eleanor, who had a complicated history with her son's other women, told her it was a bad idea. But Caroline needed to know. She had to look into the eyes of the woman who was a part of her husband's secret world. They chose a small coffee shop in a quiet town to meet, a neutral place without any prying eyes. Vivian appeared older than her 29 years. She looked worn out and troubled. Her hand trembled as she picked up her coffee. "I had no idea," she said before Caroline could even speak. "About the fraud, about what he was planning for you. I truly thought—" Her words trailed off before she found her voice again. "I thought I was his real love story. He convinced me that you were just a business deal." "Is that the story he told you?" Caroline inquired. Vivian's eyes began to well up with tears. "He told me exactly what I wanted to hear," she said. "He told me you two had no love for each other, that the marriage was just for show. He swore to me that after the baby was born, he would finally leave you so we could be a real family." "And what about William, your son?" The tears finally spilled over and streamed down Vivian's cheeks. "He almost never sees him. He sends checks and gifts, but he never actually visits." He never really did. Caroline truly looked at the woman across from her. She was not some wicked villain trying to destroy a home. She was just another person caught in Preston's web of lies. Another woman who had fallen for his empty promises. "I am not going to offer you forgiveness," Caroline stated with a steady voice. "I am not able to do that. You knew he was married. You made choices, too." Vivian slowly nodded, accepting the truth in those words. "I know. But what I can do is understand that you were also his victim, just in a different way." A clear sense of something shifted in Vivian's expression. Perhaps it was relief, or maybe it was the validation of a truth she had been avoiding. "What will you do from here?" Caroline asked her. "I am moving to Oregon with William to be with my parents. We need a new beginning," Vivian replied, dabbing at her eyes. "I do not need anything from him. Not his money or his influence. I just want my freedom." "Then I hope you find that freedom," Caroline said. They did not hug, they did not trade numbers, and they made no plans to talk again. Some connections are simply too broken to repair. Driving back to her mother's house, Caroline felt an emotion she had not expected. It was not forgiveness. Instead, it was a deep and profound release. She was letting go of the anger she held for a person who simply was not worth the space in her heart. Her apartment in New York was already being prepared for her. Caroline had brought in a new design team, real experts, unlike the ones Eleanor, her mother-in-law, had insisted on. At last, she was choosing her own paint, her own furniture, and her own path. "Are you positive you are prepared for all of this?" Maggie asked as they loaded up the last of the boxes. "Not really, but I need to go back," Caroline said, placing the final box in the car. "This baby is coming in 4 weeks. I need to be in my own place." "That apartment was never your place, honey." "I know that," Caroline replied, "but I am going to make it my own. It will be filled with my belongings, my happiness, and my life. I am going to turn it into a place that is 100% me." Maggie pulled her into a long, tight embrace, a moment between a mother and the daughter who had both survived their own difficult journeys. "You call me for any reason at all," she said. "I promise. I mean it. Anything. If it is 3 o'clock in the morning and you need to talk, I am here. I know you are, Mom. I love you. I love you more. Forever." The trip back to the city took about 3 hours. Caroline watched as the green countryside transformed into sprawling suburbs and finally into the towering skyline of the city. She was on the very same road she had traveled just a week before, but today everything felt brand new. She had left her mother's home in silence, just as she had arrived. But this time, the quiet was not heavy with fear. It was full of peace. 3 months down the road, an entirely new woman opened the door to the apartment on Central Park West. She was holding her baby girl, Ruby Margaret Brennan. The Ashworth name was gone for good. The apartment was no longer just a space. It was finally a home. The cold white walls were now painted a warm, gentle cream color. The sharp, modern furniture was gone, replaced by comfortable pieces she had found in little antique stores. Photos of family filled the shelves, showing real smiles and happy memories, not staged pictures for a magazine. Cradling Ruby in her arms, Carolyn walked to the window. The view was the same. Central Park was still a vast expanse of green laid out below. The city still buzzed with its endless, vibrant energy. But the way she saw it all had completely changed. She finally understood that the cage she felt she was in had never been locked. She had been holding the key all along, and now she had finally let herself out. Ruby began to fuss a little, letting her know it was time for a feeding. Carolyn sank into the old wooden rocking chair her mother had sent over. It was the same one Maggie had used to soothe her to sleep when she was a baby. She felt an unbreakable link between 3 generations of strong women, all connected by love. As she nursed her daughter, she thought about the woman she used to be. She saw the woman who had walked into that gala, 8 months pregnant, feeling completely unseen. She remembered the sound of a champagne glass shattering on the floor, feeling like her whole world was breaking with it, That woman was so full of fear and desperation. She had been clinging to a marriage that was never real. The woman sitting in this chair today was no longer that person. The doorbell chimed, signaling that Teddy had arrived for their weekly catch-up. He came with papers for the foundation, which was now officially called the Brennan Family Foundation. The Ashworth name, and all the pain it stood for, had been completely erased from her life. The foundation had already sent out its first round of grants last month. The funds were directed to women's shelters, programs teaching financial independence, and support groups for mothers escaping bad situations. It was making a real difference for people who truly needed it. Preston's trial is scheduled for next month, Teddy said, always handling the subject with care. The prosecution's going to want you to testify. I know they will, she replied. And are you going to? Carolyn looked down at Ruby's beautiful, sleeping face. Yes, she said with confidence, adjusting the baby in her arms. Someday she is going to ask about her father. I want to be able to tell her that I told the truth, that I did not run away from it, that I stood up for myself and told the world exactly what he did. It will not be an easy experience, Teddy warned her. His lawyers will try to paint you as an unstable, vengeful woman, just like they said they would. They are welcome to try, she answered with a calm strength. I have my evidence, I have my witnesses, and I have nothing at all to hide. Teddy could not help but smile. You are different, Caroline. I just found the person I was before I ever met him, she said, looking right at him, before I was lost in his lies. Model. That woman never really disappeared, a kind voice had told her. She was just hidden for a little while. After her visitor left, Caroline placed her baby Ruby into her crib for a nap. She gazed out the window as the setting sun painted the sky in beautiful colors of orange and gold. Her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from her friend, Rachel. The text said, "Check the news tomorrow. We just won a Pulitzer Prize. Their investigation, the one that brought down the entire Ashworth empire, had just won the highest honor in journalism." Another message appeared. It was from Bennett Cross, confirming he was working with the investigators. The company's board had made a decision. Ashworth Industries would be shut down for good. The consequences were spreading. Dominic the son was now facing criminal charges of his own. The powerful empire was crumbling. The father had lost all respect, and his son was waiting for his day in court. Everything Preston valued more than his wife, more than his family, and more than basic decency was now gone. Then, a message came from an unknown number. Caroline almost erased it, but she opened it. The message was from Vivian. It said, "Thank you for not destroying my life as well. I am finally getting help. William and I are trying to fix our marriage. You gave us a second chance." Caroline put her phone down. She walked into the nursery and watched her baby sleep, feeling a sense of peace. Her mind drifted back to that terrible party, and she realized how completely her world had transformed since that evening. She remembered the sound of a champagne glass hitting the floor and breaking into 1,000 pieces. She remembered the big ballroom door clicking shut behind her. The woman who had entered that ballroom was just Preston Ashworth's pregnant wife. She felt like a pretty object on his arm, only there to look good and carry on his family name. But the woman who left that night was finally herself again. She was Caroline, a person who would no longer be ignored, treated like she was unimportant or made to disappear. She felt a tiny kick from her baby. Caroline opened her eyes and saw her newborn daughter looking back at her. "One day, I will tell you a story," Caroline said in a soft voice. "It's about a woman who forgot her own identity, a woman who allowed a man to convince her that she was unimportant and worthless. A woman who was about to lose it all," she went on, as baby Ruby stretched and made tiny fists. "And I will tell you how she rediscovered her courage, how she fought her way out of the darkness, how she built a new life for herself from the ashes of her past." Carolyn reached down and gently touched her daughter's face. "That woman was me, your mom. And you must always know that you can never be so broken that you cannot be whole again. You can never be so lost that you cannot find your way back. And you can never be silenced when you decide to use your voice. Ruby's tiny hand wrapped around her mother's finger with incredible strength. "We will be okay," Caroline whispered. "In fact, we will be more than just okay. We are going to be everything we want to be." As night fell, the city lights started to sparkle outside her window. This was the start of a new life. Caroline picked up her daughter and held her close, feeling a deep sense of calm. The person she was before that party was gone forever. In her place was someone stronger, someone new. She had found the one thing she believed was gone for good: herself. This was not an ending. It was a fresh start, and she was ready for it. The courtroom was completely full. Reporters filled every seat, and television vans were parked all around the building. Everyone was calling it the trial of the century. Preston Ashworth was sitting at the defense table. He looked like he had aged a decade in just a year. His expensive suit hung loosely on his thinner frame, and his famous, charming smile was gone. Carolyn sat in the witness chair, looking composed and confident. Her baby Ruby was safe at home with her own mother, Maggie, who had moved to the city to help out. The prosecutor guided her through her testimony. Caroline calmly talked about the illegal business dealings, the other family he kept secret, and the years of cruel mind games. She explained everything she discovered in a panic right after she ran from that party. Preston's legal team did everything they could to make her break down. They suggested she was just an angry woman looking for revenge. They claimed she was only doing this for the money. But Caroline answered every one of their questions with a steady and quiet voice. She did not cry. She did not get angry. She just stated the simple, honest truth. After her testimony was over, the jury left the room to make their decision. Caroline walked right by the table where Preston was sitting. He looked up at her with empty eyes. "Was it worth it?" he asked. "Was it worth tearing everything down?" She paused and looked at the man she used to love. The man who broke her heart, the same man who, without meaning to, had given her more strength than she ever knew she had. "You did this to yourself, Preston," she replied softly. "All I did was tell the truth." And with that, she turned away from him and walked out of the dark courtroom into the bright sunshine. She was walking toward a new life that was all her own. It only took the jury 4 hours to return. They found him guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced him to 23 years in a federal prison. Caroline didn't cheer or celebrate. This was not a moment for celebration. It was a moment for justice, which had finally been served. That evening, she was back in her apartment, holding her daughter Ruby. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars. The wind chimes from her mother's old porch now hung in the nursery, making soft music in the breeze. She reflected on all that she had lost, but also on everything she had gained. She thought about the quiet woman she used to be, and the powerful woman she was now. A pregnant wife left a fancy party without a word, and in less than a day, a billionaire's life fell apart. But that is not what this story is really about. The most important part is something else entirely. This is the story of a woman who learned how to speak up again. It is about a woman who found her inner power and created a new life from the ruins of deceit. This story is about staying strong. It is about bouncing back. It is about the amazing strength you find when you decide you will not be invisible anymore. Carolyn kissed her daughter's head and looked out at the sparkling city. "Once upon a time," she whispered, "a woman thought she had lost her way. But she was not lost at all. She was just waiting for the right moment to find herself." Ruby made a little smile as she slept. The sounds of the city played like a familiar song, and Caroline Brennan, was finally home. If this story resonated with you, and if you cheered for Caroline's victory, please know that many others feel the same way. Our listeners often find their own courage in stories like this. We would love for you to leave a comment and tell us what you might have done in Caroline's situation. I make sure to read every single comment, and your experiences could become the inspiration for a future story. For all of our new visitors, we invite you to click the subscribe button and turn on your notifications. We release new stories each and every week. Our stories are about finding your own strength, about getting through tough times, and about the amazing power of women who refuse to be quiet. We also ask that you share this story with anyone you know who needs to hear this message. Sometimes, a simple story is all it takes to give someone the courage to take that first step toward a better life. Finally, if you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up. Your like helps our stories reach more people who may need to hear them. Our dedicated team puts a lot of care into creating and editing these stories so we can share important life lessons with you. Each story we produce has a purpose. We want to do more than just entertain. We want to inspire you, support you, and empower you. We are so grateful to have you as part of our audience. Thank you for making this community so special.